What are you even doing here? You were uninvited yesterday. Her voice rang through the Bellamy estate like shattered glass. Guests froze mid-sentence. Champagne flutes hovered mid-air. And there I was, smiling sweetly at my son's bride, the woman I'd spent $43,000 making happy. I'm leaving, I told her, smoothing the pearls at my throat. But first, meet my special guest, an old friend of yours. Jessica's face drained white. The 12,000 Vera Wang, the 2,000 roses from Ecuador, the grand Italian marble floor. It all became her stage for collapse. Her bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the stone with a sound like Judgment Day. My name is Margaret Thompson. Everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 67, a widow, and until last week, I thought I was giving my only son the fairy tale wedding of his dreams. I emptied my late husband's life insurance, cashed bonds, even borrowed against my house. All for Andrew, all for Jessica. She was beautiful. Golden hair, doe eyes, pediatric nurse scrubs that looked like compassion sewn in fabric. She volunteered at shelters, spoke about children with longing so real it made me imagine grandchildren. She pressed her cheek to my shoulder and whispered, "You're the mother I never had." I even gave her my grandmother's pearls, 4 generations of Thompson women. But something nagged. Stories that shifted like sand. Childhood homes she couldn't keep straight. Always cash, always evasions. And slowly, she drew Andrew away from his friends, murmuring that they didn't understand their love. Still, Andrew was smiling again, really smiling, for the first time since his father died. And that was enough. Until the night I heard it. I'd gone to Andrew's apartment with wedding favors. The door was ajar. Jessica's voice drifted down the hall, low, urgent. I should have announced myself. Instead, I froze. Marcus, I told you not to call me on this number. Yes, the wedding is on schedule. I'll have access to his accounts after we're married. No, you're not getting a bigger cut. We agreed on 30%. My blood iced. I pressed against the wall, hardly breathing, the box shaking in my arms. She laughed softly, cruel. The old lady's already given us over 40 grand. After the wedding, she'll hand us the down payment too. This mark is worth at least 200,000. Mark. My son was a mark. I crept out, silent, hands trembling. By the time I reached my car, I was gasping, pulling over 3 blocks away to keep from collapsing behind the wheel. Everything snapped into place. The lies, the cash, the isolation. My Andrew was prey. That night, I cried angry tears. But beneath the grief, something harder took root. If Jessica Miller thought she could destroy my son and rob our family blind, she had chosen the wrong mother. Because I had a name now. And that name was Marcus. Marcus. The name echoed in my skull as I gripped the steering wheel 3 blocks from Andrew's apartment. My forehead rested against the leather until the faint smell of worn stitching and sweat filled my nose. My breath fogged the windshield even though the air outside was mild. On the seat beside me, the box of favors had toppled, ribbons spilling like severed veins. The old lady's already given us over 40 grand. This mark is worth at least 200,000. That was me, the old lady, and Andrew, my son, my only child, was the mark. I couldn't drive for a long time. My hands were trembling so hard the keys rattled in the ignition. When I finally pulled away, every stoplight felt like an interrogation. Red. Did you hear her right? Green. Are you sure? Yellow. Do you have the courage to face what's true? By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was hollowed out. Inside, the kitchen looked unchanged. Blue checkered curtains, the jar of wooden spoons, my husband's coffee mug still hanging on its hook 3 years after he died. but I felt like an intruder in my own home. I set the favors on the counter. The ribbons gleamed under the light as if mocking me. I pressed both palms flat against the laminate until my arms ached. Then the tears came. Hot, bitter, messy. Not graceful sobs, but the kind that make your chest seize and your throat burn. I slid into a chair, elbows on the table, hands covering my face. I cried because I had believed Jessica, because I had defended her, because I had given her my grandmother's pearls, the only heirloom that connected me to 4 generations of women who had survived wars, miscarriages, and heartbreak. I had looked into those doe eyes and seen a future that wasn't real. But under the tears, something else rose up. Something hard. Something I hadn't felt since the nights I argued with oncologists about my husband's treatment plan, demanding second opinions while he lay too weak to speak for himself. If she thought she could destroy my son and rob us blind, she had chosen the wrong family. That night, after the tears dried, I opened my laptop and typed what I never thought I would. Private Investigators Charleston SC. The next morning, I met Patricia Hayes. The cafe was one of those narrow Charleston places with brick walls and chalkboard menus. She slid into the booth opposite me, hair pulled tight, eyes sharp. 10 years younger than me, maybe, but the kind of woman who carried authority like an invisible badge. I told her everything. Jessica's stories that didn't line up, the cash-only habits, the phone call. When I finished, my coffee was cold and my hands were clammy on the ceramic mug. "What you're describing," Patricia said, her tone even, "is a romance scam with a marriage twist. They're professionals. They watch. They mirror. They bleed people dry." I repeated, my mouth sour around the word. "She has partners," Patricia explained. "One does the research, sometimes pretends to be family. It adds credibility." I slid a check across the table, my signature trembling at the bottom. "How long?" She studied me, her eyes softening just a fraction. For someone foolish enough to use her real voice on the phone, not long. 2 weeks passed like 2 years. I planned rehearsal dinners with Jessica's input, smiled through tastings, posed for photos with neighbors who gushed about how lucky Andrew was. At night, I stared at the ceiling fan slicing shadows on my bedroom wall. My phone sat beside me like a loaded gun. I told no one, not even my sister, not my church friends. To speak it aloud was to admit how far the deception had gone. When Patricia finally called, I was steeping tea. "Margaret," she said, "sit down." "I'm standing," I whispered, because my knees refused to bend. "Jessica Miller doesn't exist. Her real name is Sarah Collins, 29, from Tampa. 3 arrests for fraud. Convicted once." The kettle wailed behind me. I let it scream. "She works with partners," Patricia continued. "One of them, Marcus Rivera, most frequent, romantic once, until she scammed him out of 15 grand and disappeared. He's been hunting her for 2 years. The room tilted. I turned off the burner with hands that didn't feel like mine. "How do you know all this? Facial recognition? Records? Old arrest photos?" "She volunteers at a free clinic sometimes, enough to sell the nurse story, but there's no license, no payroll. The social security number is fake." I sank into a chair, the wood digging into my spine. My pearls, it was all theater. "Patricia," I said finally, "find Marcus Rivera." She paused, reading something in my face. "Margaret, what are you planning?" I stared at the kettle cooling on the stove, the steam fading into nothing. "I think a man who's been chasing her for 2 years deserves an invitation." Her voice held reluctant admiration. "You want to bring him to the wedding?" "I want her mask ripped off," I said, "in front of my son, in front of everyone." She didn't argue. "He's in Atlanta." "I'll text you his number." That night, I stood on my back porch while cicadas screamed in the oaks. Patricia's text glowed on my phone. My finger hovered over the call button. Finally, I pressed it. "Marcus Rivera?" A man's voice answered, gravel roughened by background noise of trucks and metal. Mr. Rivera, I said, my name is Margaret Thompson. I believe you knew my son's fiancée as Sarah Collins. Silence stretched. Then sharp. Where is she? In Charleston, I said. She's marrying my son in 9 days. She's already stolen over 40,000. She's planning more. He exhaled through his teeth. That sounds like her. I told him about the phone call, about the pearls, about the way she'd woven herself into Andrew's life. My voice didn't shake once. You want me to crash it? He said after a pause, something like reluctant respect threading his tone. I want her exposed, I replied, in front of everyone, especially my son. We spoke 20 minutes, hammering out details. When we hung up, I stood in the doorway and let the night air sting my face. The helpless fury was gone. In its place was something colder, sharper. Purpose. The days before the wedding blurred into careful lies. I canceled hair appointments and alterations, told friends I might travel, assured Andrew I wanted his happiness above all. Jessica herself called me, her voice dipped in sugar. Thank you for being so understanding. Andrew said you're going to Savannah. I matched her tone. That's the plan, a little getaway. When she laughed softly, I imagined how it would sound caught in her throat when the truth walked through those chapel doors. The night before the wedding, sleep would not come. I sat at the kitchen table under one weak bulb, pearls laid out in front of me like silent witnesses. I traced their cool surface with my fingertips. 4 generations of Thompson women had worn them. Now they rested in the hands of a woman preparing for war. At dawn, rain freckled the sidewalks. I dressed in black, simple, dignified. The pearls clasped at my throat felt heavier than ever. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Mrs. Thompson? The voice was steady, carried over the hum of a gas station cooler. It's Marcus Rivera. I'm 20 minutes out. I looked into the mirror across the hall. A widow? A mother? A woman who had been called old, foolish, desperate. But in the glass, I saw none of that. I saw a fighter, shoulders squared, eyes unblinking. I'm ready, I said. And as I slipped the phone back into my purse, I realized the weight I carried wasn't just pearls. It was every lie Jessica had told, every dollar she had stolen, every moment my son's heart had been cheapened by a performance. Today, those lies would burn. I'm ready, I told Marcus, and I meant it. But readiness didn't feel like courage. It felt like waiting. The kind of waiting you do in hospital corridors, staring at pale tile until the doctor appears. My stomach clenched so tight I couldn't keep down toast. Still, I dressed with care. A plain black dress, my grandmother's pearls, low heels that wouldn't betray me with a stumble. The Bellamy estate was set like a jewel in Charleston's crown. Columns, oak-shaded gardens, and those marble floors that seemed designed for both celebration and humiliation. I had walked those halls weeks earlier as the mother of the groom, glowing with pride. Now I would return as an uninvited guest. The plan was simple. Marcus would wait in his car until my signal. I would slip through the garden entrance, unseen. He would walk the aisle when the moment was perfect. It sounded straightforward when we mapped it out. In reality, it felt like threading a needle in a hurricane. At 11 a.m., my phone vibrated again. The florist, then the caterer, then the venue coordinator, each call more frantic than the last. I let them pile into voicemail. Sarah, Jessica, whatever name she wore, was too busy with makeup brushes and photographers to notice the fire smoldering at her feet. At noon, Andrew called. His voice carried stress like static. Mom, something weird is happening. All the vendors are saying her family is supposed to pay, but Jessica's panicking. She swears she never told them that. I steadied my tone, injecting just enough hurt to make him back down. Andrew Thompson, do you honestly think I'd sabotage your wedding? He hesitated. No, I'm sorry. She's just so upset. I know, sweetheart, and I only want your happiness. The lie tasted like vinegar. But it was necessary. Love sometimes means standing in the fire so someone else can see the flames. By 1 o'clock, I left my house. The drive into Charleston was heavy with rain. Spanish moss clung wetly to the oaks, the streets slick as polished pewter. I parked 2 blocks away, tightened my coat, and walked quickly through alleys slick with puddles. My shoes made soft tapping sounds on the cobblestones, too loud in my ears. The estate loomed ahead, white columns glowing ghostly against gray skies. Guests in bright umbrellas funneled toward the main doors, their laughter muffled by the weather. I kept my head down and circled to the side entrance near the catering kitchen, just as I'd planned. Inside, chaos reigned. Staff barked into phones. A florist's assistant wheeled buckets of roses, their white petals bruised brown at the edges. No one looked at me twice. Just another older woman in black, carrying a small bouquet. I found my spot behind a marble column at the back of the chapel. The scent of wet roses and floor polish mingled thick in the air. From here, I could see everything: the aisle, the altar, my son's face. Andrew stood at the front, his tuxedo immaculate, his eyes glowing with a happiness that sliced me open. I had to grip the column to keep my knees from buckling. That joy, real, unguarded joy, would be gone in minutes, and I would be the one to take it. The organist began to test the keys, each note echoing through the vaulted ceiling like a countdown. Guests rustled into pews, whispers and perfume mixing in the heavy air. I spotted neighbors from our cul-de-sac, women from my church circle, Andrew's college friends. Phones peeked out of pockets, ready to capture the fairy tale. None of them knew what storm was about to rip through. My phone buzzed in my purse, a text, "In position, Marcus." I typed back, hands steady despite my pulse. "Wait for my signal." Time slowed. The minister shuffled papers. The photographer crouched near the front, adjusting his lens. Andrew tugged at his cufflinks, then lifted his head toward the doors, anticipation softening his whole face. The music swelled. Every guest rose in unison, a sea of silk and suits. The chapel doors opened. And there she was. Sarah Collins, draped in $12,000 of Vera Wang and the pearls that should never have touched her skin. She glided forward, roses trembling in her hands. To anyone else, she was radiant. To me, she was wrought-wrapped in lace. My chest tightened. This was the moment. I slipped my phone out of my purse, thumb hovering over the screen. The letters of Marcus's name blurred as tears pricked hot at the corners of my eyes. But I didn't press send, not yet. I watched Andrew's face instead. The way his eyes shone. How his mouth trembled with emotion. My baby. The boy who once clutched my hand, crossing busy streets, now waiting to bind his life to a woman who would gut him without a second thought. The music surged louder, the guests leaning slightly forward as if pulled by a string. Sarah's veil caught the light like spun sugar. My pulse hammered so loud I thought the people near me might hear. And then, in the middle of that unbearable beauty, I pressed my thumb down. Now. The text left my phone with a tiny vibration, almost nothing. Yet it was the loudest act of my life. I slipped the phone back into my purse and drew a long breath. Around me, guests smiled, phones lifted, cameras clicked. Sarah reached the halfway mark down the aisle, every step carrying her closer to Andrew, closer to victory. The doors behind her creaked again. A new set of footsteps echoed against the marble, deliberate, unhurried. I felt my throat tighten as I shifted slightly from behind the column. This was no longer waiting. This was the moment the storm broke. The chapel doors groaned open again, though the music had not ended. At first, the guests thought it was latecomers, someone rushing in from the drizzle, but the figure who strode down the aisle was no guest. Marcus Rivera moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had been hunting his quarry for years. His suit was wrinkled, his shoes damp from the rain, but his presence filled the space like thunder. Every head turned. A collective ripple ran through the pews. Sarah faltered mid-step, her bouquet trembling, petals scattering. "Sarah Collins," Marcus's voice boomed, carrying easily to the rafters. "Did you really think you could hide forever?" The words slammed into the chapel like a wrecking ball. Gasps broke from the crowd. Sarah froze, her face bleaching as pale as her dress. Andrew stepped instinctively in front of her, confusion etched across his features. "Sir, you have the wrong person. This is Jessica Miller." Marcus laughed, harsh and humorless. "Jessica Miller? Is that the name she's using now?" He pulled a worn folder from his jacket and flipped it open. Photos fluttered in his hand, evidence spilling like cards from a magician's deck. "Her real name is Sarah Collins. She's a professional con artist. I should know. I was her partner, until she stole 15 grand from me and vanished." "No!" Sarah's voice cracked, shrill and desperate. "Andrew, I don't know this man. He's delusional." But her hands shook. The sweet, practiced tone fractured into jagged edges. I saw the mask slip, even if Andrew could not yet. Marcus held up the photographs one by one. "Here's Sarah in Miami, running a credit card scam at the Ritz. Here she is in Birmingham, posing as a cancer patient to steal from church funds. And here—" He paused, voice turning colder. "Here she is leaving my hotel room in Memphis with my wallet, my watch, and the engagement ring I was stupid enough to buy her." The murmurs grew into a buzzing hum, wedding guests whispering, phones lifted to record. Andrew's face was pale, his lips trembling. "Jessica, what is he talking about?" "He's lying," Sarah gasped. "Andrew, you know me, you love me, we're getting married." "Love?" Marcus barked. "She wouldn't recognize love if it bit her on her lying ass. Want to know what she really thinks of your precious Andrew?" He yanked out his phone. "I've got recordings. Here's what she called him, her pathetic mama's boy mark." The words echoed against marble and wood. Guests recoiled, whispers sharper now. I pressed harder into the column, my heart splintering as I watched my son's world crumble. Sarah rallied, forcing her voice back into syrup. "Even if any of that were true, people can change. Andrew, you believe in second chances, don't you, darling?" It was masterful manipulation. A knife slipped under ribs. She appealed to the very part of him that made him gentle, trusting. For a flicker, I saw his eyes soften, torn between doubt and devotion. Marcus's mouth twisted. "Second chances? Then tell him about the other mark, Sarah, the one you're working right now." Andrew turned sharply. "What is he talking about?" Sarah's denial was too fast. "I don't know what he means." Marcus scrolled his phone. 3 weeks ago, you called me. You bragged about a lonely old bat who's already given you 40 grand. Ring any bells?" Silence smothered the chapel. 300 guests stared at her. My nails bit into the column as my own breath stilled. Andrew's eyes widened, horror spreading across his face. "You called my mother that?" His voice was ragged, disbelieving. Sarah's composure cracked. "It was taken out of context." "Context?" His voice rose, trembling with rage. "You laughed at her, after she gave you everything, after she handed you my grandmother's pearls." His gaze dropped to her neck. The pearls gleamed under the lights, damning and undeniable. Sarah's hand flew to her throat, covering them like a thief caught red-handed. "Andrew, I can explain." "Explain what?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Explain how you've been mocking my mother while spending her money? Explain how you called me a mama's boy while planning to rob us blind?" Sarah's shoulders sagged. For the first time, she looked her true age, stripped of innocence and performance. Her voice came small, defeated. "It started as a job, just another mark. But then, I thought maybe I could make it real." Andrew's face crumpled, grief and fury colliding. "Your name, your job, your family. What part of you was ever real?" She scanned the chapel, eyes darting like a cornered animal. That's when her gaze locked on mine. Recognition flickered. Her finger shot out. "You! This was you!" The congregation turned, every eye swiveling to me. Andrew's face followed, shock blooming into horror. "Mom? You said you were going to Savannah." I stepped from behind the column, straightening my pearls. My voice was calm, steady. "I lied, sweetheart. Something I learned from the experts." "You orchestrated this?" His words were jagged, wounded. "I exposed it," I corrected. "There's a difference." Sarah pounced on the doubt. "She's jealous, Andrew. She couldn't stand that you chose me. She hired this man to ruin our wedding, to control you forever." Her voice dripped poison, playing on every stereotype about mothers-in-law. For a heartbeat, I saw hesitation cloud Andrew's face. 29 years of her manipulations against 67 years of my love, hanging in the balance. Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting through. "Mrs. Thompson didn't hire me. I volunteered." He held up his phone. "Want to hear her yourself?" The recording blared into the hushed chapel. Sarah's voice, cruel and mocking. "The old bat is so desperate for grandchildren, she'll believe anything. And the son? Complete mama's boy. All I have to do is cry about my tragic past, and he writes another check." Andrew's face went from white to red to gray. His hand rose to his temple as if steadying himself. And in that moment, my heart broke again. Not for the lies, but for the boy who still wanted so desperately to believe in love. Sarah tried again, voice shaking. "I didn't mean it. Andrew, you know me. You know I love you." But Andrew stepped back, disgust clear. "Is it true? Any of it?" Her answer was too quick, too defensive. The guests leaned forward, holding their breath. Finally, Sarah whispered, "I need to leave." "Yes," Andrew said, his voice hollow. "You do." But Sarah wasn't finished. She turned back, her face twisting with venom. "You think you've won, don't you, Mrs. Thompson? Congratulations. You got your son back. But he'll never trust another woman again. You've ruined him for love." Her words sank like stones in my chest. For the first time since this began, doubt stabbed me. Had I gone too far? Had my fight to save him broken something beyond repair? Andrew's voice, cracked but firm, answered for me. "No, she didn't ruin me. You did. Mom was protecting me. You were destroying me." Sarah's mask fell completely, fury blazing. "You'll regret this. Both of you. This isn't over." But Marcus stepped closer, lips curling. "Actually, it is. The FBI has been very interested in your little games." He tapped his watch. "They should be here any minute." And then, as if on cue, 2 men in dark suits appeared at the doors, badges raised. The words fraud, identity theft, federal banking violations rang through the chapel like the toll of a bell. Guests fumbled for phones. The minister looked lost, clutching his Bible. My son stood rigid at the altar, tuxedo still crisp, life unraveling around him. And I felt no triumph. Only the weight of what had been torn open. The devastation spread across marble floors and flower petals. My son's dreams lay in ruins, and I was the one who had lit the fuse. As Sarah was led away in handcuffs, screaming about lawyers, the chapel fell into stunned silence. 300 guests sat frozen, unsure whether to applaud, cry, or leave. Andrew's shoulders slumped, his face blank. I had saved him, but in that hollow quiet, all I could feel was the jagged edge of failure. Because sometimes saving someone means destroying them first. The agents' voices rang against the vaulted ceiling. "Sarah Collins, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and violations of federal banking regulations." Gasps rose like waves. Phones shot into the air. 1,000 shutters clicked as if the chapel itself had become a courtroom. Sarah screamed protests as the agents cuffed her, her $12,000 dress dragging across the marble, the pearls at her throat gleaming like stolen trophies. She twisted, shrieked, spat promises of lawsuits, but the clatter of her heels was drowned by the quiet authority of federal voices reading her rights. Andrew stood at the altar, hands limp at his sides, his tuxedo immaculate but his soul stripped raw. His eyes were wide and vacant, staring at the doors where his bride, no, his con artist, was dragged into the gray drizzle. I wanted to rush to him. Every maternal instinct screamed to hold him, shield him. But my feet stayed planted. This was not a wound I could bandage with comfort. He had to see the truth bleed out in front of everyone. The chapel air was thick, humid with roses and shame. Guests shifted uneasily, whispering. Some looked at me with admiration, others with suspicion, all of them waiting for what came next. Finally, Andrew spoke, voice hoarse but carrying. "Well, this is awkward." Nervous laughter scattered across the pews, a release valve in the tension. He raked a hand through his hair, sighing. "The wedding is obviously canceled, but the reception's already paid for. If anyone wants to stay for dinner and an open bar, be my guest." This time, laughter came more genuine, rippling through the stunned crowd. The minister, pale and sweating, closed his Bible with trembling hands. The organist stopped mid-chord. Guests began to stand, murmuring, some hugging, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A few already live-streamed, their screens glowing like lanterns in the dim chapel. Andrew turned then. His gaze found me. Across the wreckage, mother and son locked eyes. He walked slowly, each step deliberate, the crowd parting for him. By the time he reached me, I could see everything in his expression: gratitude, anger, embarrassment, grief. "Mom," he said quietly, raw, "we need to talk." "Yes," I answered. My throat tightened around the word. He unclasped the pearls from his bride's neck, no, from Sarah's neck, and placed them in my palm. The weight nearly broke me. "These belong to you," he whispered. "They belong to the woman you marry when she's worthy of them," I said softly. Tears glistened in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, for not believing you, for choosing her over you, for being such an idiot." "You weren't an idiot," I told him, straightening his tie with shaking fingers. "You were in love, or at least you thought you were. That's what love does. It blinds." He looked down, shoulders heaving. "How long did you know?" I drew a breath. "I suspected a month ago. I had proof 2 weeks ago. I hired a private investigator. Marcus volunteered when I told him where to find her." Andrew gave a humorless laugh. "Hell hath no fury like a con artist scorned." The crowd around us buzzed, their phones still raised, but I barely noticed. All I saw was my son, stripped raw, but finally seeing clearly. We walked together down the aisle, past rows of stunned faces. Neighbors nodded. Old friends squeezed my hand. Mrs. Henderson from next door leaned close as we passed. "Margaret Thompson, you are one smart cookie. I never trusted that girl. Too pretty, too sweet. Real women have edges." Her words made me smile faintly despite the storm inside me. The grand ballroom of the estate became an improvised reception. The band abandoned wedding marches for blues riffs. The bar opened early. The guests, freed from pretense, relaxed into something almost celebratory, awake for a marriage that never happened. Andrew moved among them like a politician, shaking hands, thanking people for coming, apologizing with quiet grace. I watched him from across the room, pride swelling in my chest. Not for his career, not for his charm, but for his resilience. He was broken, but he was standing. Marcus found me near the dessert table, where an untouched wedding cake gleamed under the lights. He extended his hand. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "thank you for giving me the chance. I've been waiting 2 years for this." I clasped his hand firmly. "And I thank you. Without you, I couldn't have pulled it off." "What you did took guts," he said. "Most mothers would have tried to talk their sons out of it. They'd have failed. You played chess while the rest of us played checkers." I smiled thinly. "Any mother would have done the same." He shook his head. "No, ma'am, most wouldn't." He drifted back into the crowd, leaving me alone with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and a band improvising through pain. That was when Andrew returned, 2 champagne flutes in hand. He set one in front of me. "You look like you're having second thoughts," he said quietly. I accepted the glass, watching bubbles rise and burst. "I'm wondering if there might have been a gentler way." He sipped, eyes steady on mine. "Like sitting me down and saying my fiancé was a con artist? You know how well that would have gone. I'd have accused you of jealousy, of control." His honesty sliced me, because it was true. "You know what changed my mind?" he asked. I shook my head. "It wasn't Marcus's photos. It wasn't even the recordings. It was her face when she realized you'd outplayed her. Just for a second, the mask fell. I saw who she really was. Cold, calculating, and furious you'd beaten her." I closed my eyes, feeling tears prick again. "She underestimated you," Andrew continued. "She thought you were just a lonely old woman desperate for grandchildren. She had no idea you were tougher than her, smarter than her, more dangerous than she could ever imagine." "Not smarter," I murmured, "just more motivated." He smiled sadly. "Mom, you orchestrated the downfall of a professional con artist with her own partner in the FBI. That's not just maternal instinct, that's strategy." We clinked glasses. The sound was small, sharp, final. Across the room, the whispers continued. Guests dissected every moment. Some admired me, others pitied Andrew, many recorded clips already climbing social media. I heard phrases float through: hat wedding crash, hash con bride, hat justice served. It was a circus, but it was also truth, and truth has a way of spreading whether you like it or not. I looked at my son, his tuxedo rumpled, his heart bruised, but his spine straighter than I'd ever seen. For the first time in months, I believed he might heal. Still, the words Sarah hurled as she was dragged out lingered like poison. "He'll never trust another woman again. You've ruined him for love." That fear gnawed at me. Had I saved him only to scar him deeper? I glanced at Andrew, sipping champagne, speaking quietly to an old college friend. The weight of that question pressed hard in my chest. Because even victories can feel like defeats when love is the price. And as the music swelled, as laughter rippled through the ruined ballroom, I couldn't help but wonder, had I protected my son, or had I broken him? The answer, I knew, would come not tonight, but in the days and years ahead. For now, I lifted my glass once more. "To justice," I whispered. Andrew turned, caught my eye, and raised his own glass. "To family." And beneath the surface of those words, something darker stirred. Because justice was never simple, and family was never clean. The ballroom buzzed long after the FBI left. Laughter, music, and the clink of glasses mingled with hushed retellings, each guest adding their version of what they'd seen. By evening, the story was already escaping into the world. Hashtags spinning, videos uploading, Charleston's wedding of the century turned public cautionary tale. I stood off to the side, pearls warm against my throat, watching Andrew thread through the crowd. He looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, but every handshake and nod carried a new steadiness. He wasn't the gullible groom anymore. He was a man who had stared betrayal in the face and survived. He found me near the bandstand, 2 champagne flutes in his hands. "Mom," he said softly, offering one. "You did it." "I didn't feel like I won," I admitted. "It felt like I ripped something open that might never heal." He studied me, then shook his head. "You saved me. If you'd just told me, I would have defended her. You knew I needed proof so undeniable even I couldn't look away. You gave me that." Tears blurred my vision. "But she was right about one thing. You may never trust again." Andrew took a slow sip, then exhaled. "Maybe not right away, but trust isn't gone. It's just wiser now. You didn't ruin me for love, Mom. You reminded me what love should be: sacrifice, honesty, protection. Not lies wrapped in lace." His words sank into me like balm. For the first time since this nightmare began, My shoulders eased. Across the room, Marcus caught my eye from the doorway. He tipped his head once in farewell, his expression unreadable. Then he was gone, slipping back into the shadows of his own unfinished life. Guests began to leave. Some hugged us. Some whispered encouragement. A few still looked at me like I was a villain who'd hijacked a fairy tale. Maybe I was, but villains don't stand in marble chapels to protect their sons. By midnight, only a handful remained. Andrew and I sat together at a round table littered with empty glasses and crumpled napkins. The band packed up. Staff cleared plates. The roses, wilting now, looked less like romance and more like debris. He reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you," he said simply. I squeezed his fingers. For what? For seeing through her. For not giving up on me. For being willing to be the bad guy until I could see the truth. The words cracked something in me. I'd worried so long about being the villain. But in his eyes, I was still his mother, the one who fought when he couldn't. We left together under the dripping oaks, the night air heavy with magnolia. Andrew drove. I watched his profile in the glow of the dashboard, and for the first time in months, I saw peace settling into his features. When he pulled into my driveway, he didn't rush to leave. He turned to me. "Next time I fall in love," he said with a weary smile, "I'm running a background check first." I laughed, the sound breaking free like sunlight after rain. Maybe that's a bit extreme. After today, not really. But either way, I've learned one thing. What's that? Never underestimate a Thompson woman. The pride in his voice wrapped around me like a blanket. Inside, I set my pearls back in their velvet box. 4 generations had carried them through wars, funerals, and now a wedding that never was. They would wait again, until Andrew found someone worthy. I stood at the kitchen window, looking at the dark garden, and felt something I hadn't in months. Calm. We had survived the storm. Justice had been served, love tested, family scarred, but intact. Sometimes the best weddings are the ones that never happen, because they clear the way for the life that truly should. So if you've listened this far, thank you. If you've ever been betrayed and clawed your way back to clarity, you know how heavy and how freeing it feels. And if my story helps even one person see the truth before it's too late, then it was worth every pearl, every tear, every broken dream. Don't carry it alone. Share your voice. Tell your story. And if you want more stories like this, stay with me. Join our circle at Roots and Secrets. Like, comment, and subscribe. Because sometimes the only way to survive betrayal is to know you're not the only one who has. And tonight, for the first time in months, I believe that's enough.